There's a photograph that sits in the National Archives. It's not famous, it's not labeled, and for over a century no one was supposed to know what it meant. In the image, a young woman stands beside a cradle. Her face is calm, her dress pristine, but if you look closely at her eyes, you'll see something else. Fear, because the child in that cradle wasn't hers by choice. It was hers by blood, and that blood carried something no one in her family had ever spoken about. A genetic flaw that didn't just run through her veins, it ran through the veins of men who built railroads, signed treaties, and shaped the laws of entire states. This isn't a story about royalty or famous families. This is about the other kind of power, the kind that hides in plain sight, the kind that marries into silence and buries its mistakes in unmarked graves. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand why certain names in American history were scrubbed from records, why certain bloodlines vanished without explanation, and why the children born from those unions were never allowed to speak. This is the story of a lineage that changed history, not through greatness, but through what it tried to hide. And it all started with a single mistake in the blood. In 1847, a man named Cornelius Harrow owned over 2,000 acres in Virginia. He wasn't a household name. He wasn't a president or a general. But he was connected. His sister married a senator, his cousin sat on the Supreme Court, and his wealth came from something older than money, land grants that stretched back to the colonial era, passed down through blood, protected by law. Cornelius had 3 sons. The eldest was expected to inherit everything. The second would enter politics. The third, a boy named Edmund, was different. From the time he was young, Edmund showed signs. Seizures that came without warning, violent outbursts that left servants bruised and silent, a stare that seemed to look through people rather than at them. The family called it sensitivity. They said he had a poet's mind, an artist's temperament. But the doctors who visited the estate in secret knew better. They saw the tremors in his hands, the way his speech would slur and twist, the moments when he didn't recognize his own mother. They never wrote it down. They were paid not to. When Edmund turned 19, his father arranged a marriage. The girl was 16, the daughter of a tobacco merchant who owed Cornelius a favor. Her name was Abigail. She had no say in the matter. No one told her about Edmund's condition. No one warned her that the bloodline she was entering carried something broken. The wedding took place in the fall. By winter, Abigail was pregnant. And by spring, the child was born in a locked room on the 3rd floor of the estate, far from the main house, far from witnesses. The midwife who delivered the baby left that night and never returned to the county. The child, a boy, lived for 6 days. He never opened his eyes. His skin was pale, almost translucent. His limbs twitched in rhythms that didn't belong to a newborn. Abigail held him once, just once. And then they took him away. There was no funeral, no baptism, no record of birth. Just a small stone marker in the woods behind the property, overgrown now, unreadable. But that child wasn't the mistake. He was only the first. Abigail would go on to have 4 more children. 3 survived past infancy. 2 of them showed the signs, the same tremors, the same vacant stares that lasted too long, the same sudden rages that came from nowhere and vanished just as fast. The family called it bad nerves. They said the children were delicate, high-strung, prone to fits of melancholy. But the truth was written in their blood, coiling through their DNA like a sentence handed down from generation to generation. By the time Edmund died in 1871, his surviving children had already married into other families, families with land, families with influence, families whose names you'd recognize if I said them out loud. But I won't, because some of those names are still attached to foundations, universities, and political dynasties that exist today, and they've spent over a century making sure no one connects the dots. One of Edmund's daughters, a woman named Catherine, married a railroad magnate in Pennsylvania. She had 7 children. 4 of them displayed neurological issues severe enough that they were kept on separate floors of the family mansion, attended by private nurses who signed agreements never to speak about what they saw. One boy, Catherine's youngest son, had episodes where he would scream for hours, clawing at his own face until his fingernails broke. Another child, a girl, never learned to speak. She would sit in the sunroom, rocking back and forth, humming a single note until someone sedated her with laudanum. The family hosted charity galas in the same house. Senators and governors walked past those locked doors and heard nothing, because the walls were thick, and the staff knew better than to talk. Catherine's husband commissioned a private study in 1889. He wanted to know what was wrong with his children. He hired a German physician, a man who specialized in hereditary diseases, to examine the family medical history. The doctor spent 3 months reviewing records, conducting interviews, tracing the bloodline back through Edmund, through Cornelius, and even further. What he found terrified him. He wrote a single report. 23 pages. It detailed a genetic mutation that affected the central nervous system, a flaw that caused progressive degeneration, seizures, cognitive decline, and in some cases, complete psychosis. The mutation was autosomal dominant. That meant every child born to a carrier had a 50% chance of inheriting it, and it had been present in the Harrow line for at least 4 generations. The doctor sealed the report and handed it to Catherine's husband. He was paid $10,000, a fortune at the time, and told to leave the country. He did. The report was burned, but the bloodline kept spreading. By the turn of the century, the mutation had reached at least 12 families across 6 states. And every single one of them knew. They didn't call it by name. They didn't speak about it at dinner tables or in letters, but they knew. You could see it in the way certain children were kept out of photographs, in the way some family members were sent to live in private sanitariums with no official record of admission, in the way entire branches of family trees were pruned from genealogies, names crossed out, birth records quietly altered or lost. There was a system to the silence. When a child was born showing the signs, the family would wait. If the symptoms were mild, the child might be allowed to live a supervised life, married off to someone outside the bloodline. Their condition explained away as nervousness or poor constitution. But if the symptoms were severe, the child disappeared, not in the way you're imagining. There were no murders, no violent ends. These were wealthy families. They had options. Private institutions existed for this exact purpose. Places with gardens and high walls and names like Fairhaven or Greenwood Manor. Places that advertised rest and recuperation for those of delicate health. But inside, the reality was different. Rows of rooms with reinforced doors. Patients who never received visitors. Medical staff who were paid to keep no records and ask no questions. Some of these facilities still exist today, repurposed as luxury rehabilitation centers or boutique hotels. If you walked their halls now, you'd never know that a century ago, children with the wrong last name were left there to live out their lives in medicated silence. One such place was in upstate New York. It was called Whitmore House. Between 1892 and 1924, at least 19 members of interconnected families were admitted there. None of them were ever released. Their death certificates listed causes like heart failure, pneumonia, complications from influenza. But the real cause was always the same, the blood they were born with, and here's what makes it worse. These families didn't just hide their children, they hid the evidence. medical records were purchased and destroyed. Doctors were paid to retire early or relocate. Nurses who spoke too openly were dismissed without reference. In one case, a physician named Dr. Marion Colfax tried to publish a paper on hereditary neurological disorders in 1911. She treated multiple patients from these families and recognized the pattern. Her research was seized before publication. Her medical license was revoked on a fabricated ethics charge. She spent the rest of her life working as a schoolteacher in rural Ohio, never speaking publicly about what she'd seen. The paper she wrote was never found, but her personal journal survived, and in it she wrote one sentence that still chills me. They would rather bury their children than let the world know what runs in their veins. By the 1920s, something else was happening in America, something that gave these families a new kind of cover. The eugenics movement was gaining power. It wasn't fringe science. It wasn't happening in back alleys. It was being taught at Harvard, Yale, Princeton. It was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Carnegie Institution. And it gave the wealthy a language to justify what they'd already been doing for decades. Sterilization laws were being passed in state after state. Virginia, California, Indiana, North Carolina. The laws targeted the feeble-minded, the unfit, the degenerate. Terms that were never clearly defined. Terms that could mean anyone the state decided didn't deserve to reproduce. And behind closed doors, certain families saw an opportunity. If the government was going to sterilize poor immigrants and institutionalized women in the name of racial hygiene, why not use the same laws to quietly erase their own genetic mistakes? Records show that at least 7 members of the families connected to the Harrow bloodline were sterilized between 1924 and 1935, not in public hospitals, not as part of any official program, but in private clinics with consent forms signed by parents or guardians, procedures performed by physicians who understood discretion. One woman, a granddaughter of Catherine Harrow, was sterilized at age 17 after suffering her 3rd seizure. Her medical file listed the reason as hereditary epilepsy with risk of moral degeneration. She lived another 52 years. She never married. She never told anyone what had been done to her. Her diary was found after her death in 1987. In it, she wrote about the day she woke up in the clinic, bandaged and bleeding, and realized she would never have children. She wrote, "They didn't ask me. They didn't even tell me why. They just took it." And here's where it gets darker. Some of these families didn't just participate in eugenics, they helped fund it. Donors whose names appeared on the boards of research institutions that studied heredity, intelligence, and racial purity. The same institutions that provided the scientific justification for forced sterilization laws. The same institutions that influenced immigration policy, marriage restrictions, and involuntary commitment standards. They weren't doing it out of ideology, they were doing it out of self-preservation, because if the science said that certain genetic traits were undesirable, that certain bloodlines were tainted, then it wasn't cruelty to remove those traits from the population. It was progress, it was responsible, it was what any reasonable family would do, and the best part, no one would ever question it because the law was on their side. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? The mutation didn't disappear, it couldn't. Genetics don't care about wealth or reputation or how many laws you pass. By the 1950s, the families had scattered. Some moved west, some changed their names, some married into new money, tech fortunes, oil dynasties, families that had no idea what they were inheriting. The symptoms became easier to hide. Medicine advanced. Anticonvulsants could manage seizures, psychiatric medications could dull the rages, therapy could be explained away as stress management, and genetic testing didn't exist yet, not in any meaningful way. So the bloodline kept moving forward, quiet and patient, waiting in the DNA of people who had no idea they were carrying it. In 1983, a neurologist in Boston began noticing a pattern among his patients. 7 unrelated individuals, all presenting with nearly identical symptoms: progressive tremors, cognitive decline beginning in their 30s, seizures that didn't respond to standard treatment. He ran tests. He took family histories, and he found something that shouldn't have been possible. All 7 patients shared a common ancestor, a woman named Catherine, born in Pennsylvania in 1871, the same Catherine who married the railroad magnate, the same Catherine whose children were locked away on separate floors. The neurologist tried to publish his findings. He wanted to identify the mutation, to warn families who might be carriers, to offer genetic counseling and testing. But before his paper could go to print, he received a visit. 2 men in expensive suits. They weren't aggressive. They didn't threaten him. They simply explained that the families involved valued their privacy, that publishing this research could cause unnecessary panic and reputational harm, that it would be better for everyone if he focused his work elsewhere. He was offered a research grant, a significant one, enough to fund his lab for 5 years. He took the money. The paper was never published, but the mutation is still out there. In 2003, a genetic testing company began offering ancestry and health screenings to the public. Within 2 years, they'd identified over 40 individuals carrying the same rare neurological marker. All of them descended from families with ties to Virginia, Pennsylvania, and New York in the late 1800s. The company flagged the findings and sent letters to the carriers, offering counseling and further testing. Most of them ignored it. Some were angry. A few threatened legal action, claiming the information was an invasion of privacy. But 3 of them responded, and what they learned destroyed them. One woman discovered that her grandfather, a man she'd been told died of a heart attack, had actually spent the last 20 years of his life in a psychiatric facility. Another man found out his great-aunt, who'd been erased from every family photograph, had been sterilized at 16 and institutionalized until her death at 71. A third discovered that her daughter, who'd just been diagnosed with early-onset tremors, was carrying the same mutation. 50% chance. That's what the genetics counselor told her. Every child born to a carrier has a 50% chance, and there was no cure, no treatment that could stop the progression, just management. Just waiting. Next section, ZW. Next section 7, the truth that remains today. The mutation has a name. It's cataloged in medical databases. It's studied in research labs, but the families connected to it are still protected by something stronger than science. Silence. Because even now, even in an age where genetic testing is as easy as spitting in a tube, there are people who choose not to know. People who would rather live with uncertainty than face what's written in their blood. And you can't entirely blame them. What do you do with that information? If you knew you had a 50% chance of passing a degenerative neurological disorder to your children, would you still have them? If you knew your family had spent a century hiding, sterilizing, and institutionalizing people with your same DNA, could you ever look at your own reflection the same way? The descendants of these families live among us. Some of them know, most of them don't. They're doctors, lawyers, teachers, politicians. They have children, they have careers, they have lives built on foundations they never questioned, and beneath it all, coiled in the double helix of every cell, is the same flaw that destroyed their ancestors. Some of them will never show symptoms. Some will live full, healthy lives and never pass it on. But others won't be so lucky. The tremors will start in their 30s. The seizures will come without warning. The cognitive decline will erode them slowly, stealing their memories, their speech, their sense of self. And when it happens, they'll wonder if their parents knew, if their grandparents knew, if someone, somewhere in their family, made the choice not to tell them. There's a woman living in North Carolina right now. She's 63 years old. Her name doesn't matter, but her bloodline does. She's a direct descendant of Cornelius Harrow. She found out 5 years ago, after her sister died of complications from early-onset dementia. The doctors ran genetic tests, they found the mutation, and then they found her. She has 2 children, both adults now, both carriers. One of them has a daughter, the woman's granddaughter, 4 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes, bright and healthy and full of life. And somewhere in that little girl's DNA, the mutation is waiting. Maybe it will activate, maybe it won't. 50%, a coin flip. A genetic roulette that's been spinning for over 150 years. The woman keeps a copy of the original photograph, the one from the National Archives, the young woman standing beside the cradle, Abigail, the first wife, the first mother, the one who held her dying son and knew, somehow, that this was only the beginning. The woman stares at that photograph sometimes, late at night, and wonders if Abigail knew, if she understood what she was passing down, if she ever imagined that her bloodline would stretch across centuries, carrying the same hidden flaw, the same silent suffering, the same terrible choice. And then the woman closes the book, turns off the light, and goes to check on her granddaughter, because what else can you do? You can't change your blood. You can't rewrite history. You can't undo the mistakes of people who died before you were born. All you can do is live with it and hope that when the coin flips, it lands in your favor. The lineage that changed history didn't do it through greatness. It did it through survival, through silence, through the choice to hide rather than heal, and it's still here, still spreading, still waiting in the blood of families who will never know they're connected. That's the real horror, not what happened. But what's still happening, right now, in bloodlines that look nothing like the Harrows.